When we made it to the Railyard, the first thing that struck me about this park was the smell. I had been to many places that smelled before: abandoned buildings, literal toxic waste dumps, slaughterhouses, even factories, and real rail yards. The rail yard of the pumpkin house had none of that smell. It smelled like metal, sure. There was even the burning smell of rust and iron that I was functionally allergic to, but otherwise it smelled clean. No human waste, no smoke, no coal, no oil, no trash, not even the smell of food and grease. I know they couldn't actually make a place that smelled like an actual rail yard, but still it broke the immersion for me some. We stepped out from the tunnel onto a wooden boardwalk. Around us were more wooden walls with painted doors, but only one way to go: forward. "Can you check ahead, Grace?" Autumn asked me, and I responded by raising my right fist at her and with one finger raised, for I quickly raced ahead to check. Yeah, of course they asked me to check first. I'm the smallest, so I'm the least likely to be seen. But that also means that I was always asked to go first. Yeah, it made sense, but it still pissed me off. It was automatically my chore because I was the best at it. Don't they see how unfair it all was? It would be like if I always asked Marceline to get takeout because she was the best at dealing with humans, or if I always asked Dylan to lift the heavy boxes because he was the strongest. Yeah, we all have things we're best at, but just because I was good at something didn't mean that I wanted to do it, or even that I had to do it all the time. So, a single finger salute as I scouted ahead. Just ahead of us there was a T junction. The path to the right had a sign that helpfully marked factories, while the sign to the left said countryside. I guess to give people a way back if they had enough. Still, even as I looked around, I didn't see anything that would slow us down, so I turned in midair and started to fly back, only for me to immediately fly into a web. Ah, Tavit, I cursed, as I pushed strands out of my face to see if the webs were real or fake. Sure enough, judging by how strong and transparent the strands were, they were real. For most humans, walking into a web may be a terrifying experience, but at least they're usually big enough to tear through the webs and swat away the spiders. At my size, however, spiders could be a genuine threat. At 18 centimeters tall, I had seen spiders both a lot smaller than me and also a lot larger than me. Struggling on the web, I saw a spider crawl from the corner of her web towards me. She had long yellow and black striped legs, and she crawled slowly towards me, with small claws on the tip of her legs grabbing strands of web that didn't have droplets of stickiness. "Stop, let me go, and we can forget this happened," I told the spider in her language. Another gift from my father. A useful one, but not one that I enjoyed. I can speak any language on Earth, even animals, plants, and insects. It did not guarantee that they would listen. Spiders aren't real talkative. They don't have vocal cords. They usually communicate by clicking their mandibles and by movement, convey simple ideas like food, mating, and danger. So I guess it would be more accurate to say I was clicking in such a way that she could understand my intent. However, in most situations, it was just easier to say I can speak spider than to say I could make noises that spiders could understand intent, like a Lovecraftian god speaking to a lesser being conveying ideals that never occurred in their tiny minds before. "Food on the web. Food struggles," she said back as she crawled closer. She was a very large and very beautiful spider, as long from end to end as I was tall. She would be a danger to most fairies and to almost anything in her web. Almost anything. Although, judging by her response, the orb weaver spider wasn't a part of the pumpkin house, she was a genuine spider who genuinely thought that I was her food. That would make this next part both easier and harder. as I leaned forward in her web and used my flight as leverage to pull against her web. Under normal circumstances, the silk would have gummed up my wings, where my jugum met my back, or maybe even gum up the space between my wings, causing my fragile material to tear if I pulled too much. Normal circumstances. I was far from a normal fairy, and these were not normal circumstances. My skin, muscle, and membranes were far stronger than that of a human far larger than myself. So a simple flap of my wings tore off the web, and I was free from the web, where I could see myself reflecting in the spider's 8 eyes. As I pulled her away, I could feel her disappointment. She lost her food, and she had to reweave her web. "Should have let me go," I told her, as I pulled the silk off my skin and peeled it off the membranes of my wings. Up close to my wings, I could see the delicate black veins inside the wings that gave it the patterns and lines inside the wing. When light passed through the membranes, it gave a rainbow pattern for those below me. Something truly beautiful from my dragonfly-like wings from my back. However, the patterns generated through the wings were actually from my membranes and the blood vessels in my wings. I was not too shy to remind people who complimented my wings for being beautiful that they were actually calling my black veins and transparent chitin beautiful. That was the blood inside my body that made the rainbow and bright colors shine through. There was definitely something beautiful there, that the symbol of purity people associated with fairy purity was actually made possible through armor and blood. Still distracted by my thoughts, I made my way back to the group, where Autumn, clearly, was looking impatient while Marceline only smirked. Autumn thought that she understood Fae, and that meant she understood fairies, and by extension, me. This understanding might come in handy sometimes, but that often meant she stopped seeing me as Fallen Grace, the individual, and instead saw me as Fallen Grace, the trans Florian Fairy. "Well, there's two signs. One points that way, the other points the other way," I said unhelpfully, which caused a sigh from Autumn as she tried phrasing it in a better way to try and get me to respond in a way she could benefit. "What is on the signs?" "Words and arrows." "What do the words say?" "They say what the arrows are pointing towards." "What are the arrows pointing towards?" "This way and that way," I said unhelpfully, starting the cycle over again, as Autumn took an exasperated sigh as she stomped forward to make her way to the T-junction. The left pointed back to the countryside and the right towards the factories. "I vote we head to the factories. We have to make it to the center of the pumpkin house, and the factories are how we do that," I reminded the group while most people nodded. Autumn tapped her chin, trying to figure out if what I said was true or a lie. After a moment, she finally agreed to just go with everyone else. This night was going to be a long night if she was going to treat me like some winter court trickster instead of as an individual. The path leading forward was quite interesting. The walls were covered in graffiti that reminded me of the graffiti in post-apocalypse games and shows. I saw a dead sun painted on a few different walls, pointing towards the story about the vampire star. I saw graffiti that said not to trust the symbols, and symbols warning of body changing mutation, hobo signs marking danger, even a few radiation and biohazard symbols. But one door we passed made me pause. I floated in the air, looking at the door as I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It was a simple, chained shut door. There were no symbols on the door, and the door was clearly a real door that could be accessed, but it was not meant for the public to be accessed. Maybe it was an employee-only door. However, I had a strong feeling that wasn't the case. Sometimes you just know a door leads down a bad path. somewhere that isn't meant for anyone to go down, something so dangerous that your own curiosity is overridden by a sense of danger. What was it about that door that convinced me it was not meant to be entered? A single stenciled sentence in white over the black door. This is not a place of honor. A single sentence, a single line from a poem that everyone on the planet knew. A single line from a poem that was meant to be shared down the centuries. A line that is meant to convey the fact that the environment is poisoned, toxic, or radioactive. A danger that even a powerful civilization could not stop, only contain. At first, Marceline paused to see me admire the door, and before she could ask what it was about the door, I spoke. This is not a place of honor, I told her, and she nodded before we turned and kept going down the route before Summer asked, "What does that mean, this is not a place of honor?" She asked, and I explained the best I could. It's a warning meant to endure throughout the centuries. A warning of danger that is so deadly it will endure through thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of years. So long that the old languages, symbols, and even the warning itself will be lost throughout the centuries. Old symbols of danger can be used to become symbols of jest, such as the Jolly Roger, trefoil, and the biohazard symbols are used widely in fiction, so most people recognize it. However, it is also used in fictional settings, such as the one we are in, so in a few centuries, how will they tell the difference between a hazard made in jest versus an actual hazard? So, these lines are used to endure. They are told in stories that are meant to endure. Some stories in our history predate the time of Ash, and some go as far back as the Mesozoic era. So, some stories are used to reinforce the danger. A reminder that the line, "This place is not a place of honor," is not something meant to be explored. It isn't a dungeon to conquer. It isn't a mountain full of dragon gold. It isn't a pirate's treasure to find. It isn't something that is scribbled on a wall by artists being edgy. It isn't something that will come up by mistake. It is a singular warning, and one I will not ignore, I said with confidence, and Autumn only chuckled. I thought there was nothing that scared the unshakable fallen Grace. Aren't you supposed to be able to handle every challenge that comes your way? Autumn asked, and I bristled in anger. The unspoken part of that was, isn't your kind supposed to handle every challenge? Calling me a coward for listening to a danger. Whether that was her intent or not, she was calling me a coward, and she thought the danger wasn't real. There was a real temptation to tell her to try the door then, but even I'm not a murderer. The reason I'm able to handle everything that comes my way is because I know what to face and what battles to fight. I will never enter a place that is marked as not a place of honor. It is an even greater danger than elsewhere. I will face judgment, the sunless lands, and even the bridge of trials before I ever enter a place marked as that, he said as I turned away from the door and flew forward. Why? It can't possibly be bad as judgment, can it? Autumn asked as her sister grabbed her shoulder and started to pull her along. It's worse than judgment. You can win judgment. You cannot win against a place like that. So we will continue. Let us fight something that is much easier for us to handle, such as abominations of steel, mutation, and cancer, it said as the path led to a single metal door that had a sign over it. The King's Factory. However, the word King's was crossed out, so the only thing left was the factory. When I saw that line, I let out a chuckle when I got it. I looked around and no one else really seemed to get it, except maybe Kel, who saw the name and he started to chuckle. The factory? he said as he laughed, and I laughed along with him. Everyone else only stared at us like we were insane. After a moment, it was over, and we decided to continue. Marceline stared at me like I was insane, and Dylan stared at Kel like he wasn't making sense. Yes, the factory. Is it an in-joke that we're not going to get? He asked before Kel tried to explain. The king's factory? Moloch? The king is Moloch? The factory representing the darkest aspects of industrializations, where the workers, the customers, and the managers are all in a deep ritual of bloodletting, sacrifice, deconstruction, and construction, where it was a danger to humanity and its very existence creates wonderful products, but it comes at the cost of blood and humanity. It was very metaphor made real, Kel tried to explain, and I nodded since I knew that story, but apparently no one else did. Well, it sounds interesting, but how does that help us? Dylan asked, and Kel shrugged. I have no idea, but let's go and be careful. As the door opened, I felt a chill fill my heart. An old evil, an old darkness inside of me that I thought I had conquered, was rising a bit inside of me. Part of me that understood what that door meant when it said it wasn't a place of honor, but still wanted me to sneak underneath the door without telling anyone, to simply disappear from the world and let my pain disappear. I flew over to Marceline's shoulder and I hugged her neck. Her warmth and heartbeat filled my ears. It was a quiet, unspoken thing to us. Despite how tough and strong I put on my exterior, even when I had bad moments, a darkness I called my bad thoughts. She knew I sought comfort when I sat on her shoulder like this. Something about what Autumn said hurt something deep inside of my heart. A precious brick pulled down that made me feel like I was truly nothing, something that wasn't real and could simply disappear without being noticed. It's a good thing the slashed woman didn't ask me what is a crime no judge could forgive. I tried joking to myself, but it only made me want to cry. Despite my best efforts, small things reminded me of the darkness. The coldness inside my heart made the cold air inside of the factory feel positively warm. I could feel Marceline shiver as all I could do was focus on breathing. At that moment, all I could focus on was my own breathing as we went into the factory. Why is it always something like this? Something happens and I think I handled it. Then it just comes back like a snake that you think is dead, but it can still bite. Why did it have to be that door? Why did Autumn have to fucking say that? I took a deep breath and I opened my eyes that I didn't realize I had screwed shut when I saw the factory floor below. On the assembly line, I see people attached to the assembly line, working on strange clockwork devices made from bone and steel. The steel was rusted and the bones were yellow with age. The devices breaking before it reached the end of the assembly line. They didn't care about the quality of the device once it was beyond them. They only cared that their part was done, hating those before them for breaking the devices, not caring about those down the assembly line they were making the work harder for. They were tied to the assembly line by tubes, wires, and the substances inside. I could see tubes carrying blood down to them, and another tube removing blood from them, carried above. My eyes followed the lines above, and I saw a giant mechanical heart. Beer's word, pumps churned, and red fluid pumped through the glass vials along with gray water, that I guess was the mutagen. We had to get by the workers, and that shouldn't be too hard. We can stay on the catwalks above, and we can get to the door on the other side, Autumn said, pointing the way forward, which had more catwalks in a grid pattern and a door at the far end. Almost like a game board where you have to move forward in a careful way without getting caught by something on adjacent pieces. We should watch out for the overseers. We haven't seen them, but they're supposed to be around here, Kel warned us, and Autumn kept pointing forward. We don't need to worry about the overseers. We already know that Adansi lies. The warning about a mask worn too long becoming the face was completely false. So we know that she is lying, Autumn said before her sister corrected her. I don't think it was a lie. I think we misunderstood what she meant by face. Masks kept us from seeing what was actually around us. So by pretending to be something else, we can't actually face what is out there. The mask changes what we face until the illusion becomes true. So if she isn't lying but we misunderstood, we have to assume the overseers are real. If we're wrong and they aren't real, then there's no threat. But if we assume there is no threat, what happens if we are wrong? Summer offered while Autumn shook her head. Look, you don't know these things as well as I do. If Adansi lied before, she's lying now. There is no way we misunderstood what Adansi said. We just have to go through this area, and we will be free, Autumn said as she confidently strode forward on the catwalks, taking the quickest route to the exit. Something is wrong here, I warned Marceline, who nodded for a moment before we followed after Autumn in a much more cautious way. I flew away from Marceline's shoulder, looking around the catwalks. There was a lot of iron and rust, and it was harsh enough that I felt like I was surrounded by danger. It was like walking around a park that was full of poison ivy. You know it's there, and you want to avoid it, so you pay careful attention to it to try and avoid it. However, I was paying so much attention to the present danger that I did not notice what reached out from the darkness above and grabbed me. I let out a scream when I was grabbed. The iron felt like it was holding a too hot mug. My body wanted to flinch away, but I was captured and held in iron claws that wrapped around my torso. As I was pulled up into the darkness, below me, I could see my friends wander forward, not realizing I was gone. Help! I tried to scream, only to have another iron claw wrap around my mouth like a vice. The heat of the iron felt like it was making my skin blister under the touch. When I tried to open my mouth, the rust and iron made my mouth taste like blood. What the hell? When did the pumpkin house add threats like these? Adansi was always so careful to make sure there was no real danger, and here I was, pulled away into the darkness with metal that was harming me just by touching me. Pulled away from the light, I was suspended in darkness until I saw another light. It started alone, but then another light appeared, and then another. Soon 8 different points of light were in the darkness, all shining on me like spotlights. And as my eyes adjusted, I realized the lights weren't lights. They were eyes. The eyes of the overseer who had captured me. I couldn't easily see the rest of the face, but I could see gears, teeth, and open wounds that dripped blood and gray water down onto the distant factory floor below. The overseer was equal parts machine and flesh, but they definitely weren't living. Not anymore. Somewhere in the darkness there was rattling as something was drawn forward into the light. A cage carried by a hook. I screamed again into the iron gag, not caring about the blood filling my mouth. The overseer would not let me scream. I would still scream. I was dropped into the cage. The restraints on my torso let me go, but iron shackles remained on my arms, keeping me from flying as the top of the cage shut. It was so much worse being in the cage than being in restraints. The cage was rusty, and the edges of each bar was so sharp, even if I touched the bars, I would be cut by it and getting rust and iron into my blood. You fucking bastard, why are you doing this? I asked, lifting up my hands to try and flip off the many eyes of the overseer. This drew no reaction from the 8 spotlight eyes. The overseer still stared at me, and the gears still ground, and the blood and gray ichor dripped from the overseer into the iron heart below. My friends are too far away to see and too far away to hear. I would have to escape from this place myself. I turned from the eyes to try and see if I could find a lock or maybe a gate on my cage. There was no gate nor lock. The cage appeared to be welded closed, even above, but when I did look away, the eyes started rolling like they were ball bearings as they now focused on my face. No matter where I turned, I would find myself facing the eyes. If I tried looking directly up, the eyes would roll up there to look down at me. If I tried looking down at the rusty floor, the eye would roll below the cage at an angle, so even there I couldn't escape the stares of the overseer. Maybe my friends will come back for me, but they don't tend to look up, and I would definitely not be able to call out for them. I was stuck here, and I would not be able to use them to escape. Eventually, they would move on to get to the center of the pumpkin house before I would be released, but I would not get the prize in the center. He glanced around the cage. The rust and the iron may poison me before that happens, though. I would survive near it for a while, but even with my shoes, it will affect me for being too close for too long. It's practically radioactive being around pure iron and rust. I looked down at my shackles and I glanced at the sharp edges of the cage. I was not going to survive if I stayed here long, but at the same time, I was certain I wasn't going to be helped. There was no physical way out for me. I only had one way out as far as I could see. I would have to make one myself. It was a choice now. I could let myself be slowly poisoned by inaction, or I could take immediate action and let myself be poisoned by it. I twisted the shackles in my hand, intending to break the chain between them. They were iron, they were poisoning me slowly, but they were still only iron. Iron can break. I twisted the shackles, expecting the weakest link in the shackles to break. What I did not expect to happen was the shackles breaking off my arms completely. Free from the shackles, I grabbed the bars of the cage where the sharp edges dug into my skin. The eyes all focused on me, all staring at me and my suffering, but the overseer took no action other than watching me as I grabbed both bars and I pushed them apart in my hands. The sharp edges cutting into my hands, blood dripping from my fingers and palms, mingling with the iron and rust as it fell below. The burning filled my hands, my veins, and even my heart as the poison filled me, but still I had to pull the iron bars aside. The overseer kept staring at me as my hands pushed the bars further and further apart. Iron was poison to me, but even poison has limits before it bends. And if you bend it enough, you can break it as well. Now with the bars wide enough for me to fit through, I stepped to the edge where the overseer could still see me. Standing on the edge, I let the blood in my hands gather for a moment before I threw the blood into the eyes of the overseer, leaving the lights red and blinding the overseer as I fell from the darkness into the light, letting my wings open as I flew forward over the catwalks. As I flew into the light, I realized that I was no longer burning. When I looked at my hands, they were no longer bleeding. I was fine, but still, why would Adansi do something like that? That feels far more extreme than her normal Ferelia scares. I found my friends down by the exit looking for me when I flew in front of them. "Where were you?" Autumn asked, and I pointed up. "I found the overseer," Turns out they're very much a threat, I said, pointing up, and the others looked up, finally seeing the spider-like overseer above. Now finally in the light, I could see that the overseer was indeed something to be scared of. The creature had 8 blood-covered eyes that glowed with incandescent light. Her face still looked like it used to be human, but the lower jaw was removed, letting the upper jaw drool, bleed, and drip ichor from its mouth. The body was box-like, where inside you could see gears, pumps, and wires pull and move alongside organs like lungs, hearts, and wormy intestines. Exposed to the world and powered by its own agony, it lurched forward on the ceiling. The legs were metal and bone, with the joints made from gear and cartilage. The glass skin showed hydraulics pumping fluid, both flesh and mechanical, through the legs, allowing the legs to move, and at the tip of each leg, where a spider's tarsal claws would have been, were human hands. Normal human hands that gripped the beams above, allowing the overseer to move across the ceiling of the factory. The abdomen was a very large iron cage, where 2 of the rusty bars were pushed apart, clearly where I was imprisoned earlier. Run, I told everyone, and they did not need to be told twice as they ran through the door before the overseer had time to chase us, or worse, drop down onto the catwalk. As I flew after the others, I had an idle thought that the darkness that followed me into the factory didn't feel so strong now. It was still there, but it wasn't suffocating me now. Outside, we made it to the scaffolds that were built over the many tracks. Stairs leading up and down to the tracks were clearly visible, but it did look like the only path forward was on the scaffolding itself. Anyone see the dreadnought or the skid blood near? I asked, and everyone shook their heads. Autumn decided it was a great time to speak up. Well, why are you even worried about them? The countryside was almost nothing like we were warned about, and the overseer wasn't even a threat, Autumn said with confidence while rage filled my body. The overseer threw me in an iron cage, and I had to pull the bars apart by hand as I was bleeding and poisoned by the metal. Just because it didn't threaten you doesn't mean that it wasn't a threat. I had to choose between poisoning myself and leaving, or poisoning myself and staying. So please, Autumn, stop trying to be clever. When Marceline makes a mistake, she admits it. When Kel does something wrong, he just keeps along. I Kel along, Kel said, which, despite myself, drew a smile across my face. Even your sister can say she's sorry. Dylan apologizes all the time for things he never did. Can you just acknowledge the fact you made a mistake and we can focus on solving the next part of the Railyard together? I asked Autumn, who paused for a moment before she spoke. There's no wounds on your skin, so you weren't actually hurt. What do I have to possibly apologize for? I've not said anything wrong. She shrugged her shoulders, while I felt my anger stew, but instead of saying anything else, I landed on Kel's shoulder, sitting on it, grabbing a loop on the shoulder, as we explored the scaffolds. I wasn't going to make her apologize, but if we weren't going to see eye to eye, then I wasn't going to make it happen. Either she would make a mistake big enough that she would finally admit that she made a mistake, or she would never acknowledge it, and all I could do was sit with someone who was calm and observant, but was also able to avoid every bit of drama with almost blissful ignorance. Hey, if we're looking for the broad bottom bucket, why don't we head over to the one station that looks closed? He said, pointing forward to the furthest station, which had no lights and no movements. Why go over there? We're looking for a train that works, Kel, Autumn said before Kel offered his retort. We're looking for a train that doesn't draw attention. If the monsters are bringing people here and the enemy is trying to bring more enemy here, wouldn't they need functional train stations? We should try the abandoned one first, Kel offered, only for Autumn to scoff. Fine. We'll start there and we'll make our way back. But mark my words, Kel. The broad bottom bucket will be at one of these open stations, she said as we made our way over the catwalks, and I could see below people at each of the stations, often alternating between stations with people and the enemy. Among the survivors, I saw a lot of refugees, some of them wearing a lot of clothes, carrying heavy boxes, only to be told by the monsters guarding the way that they can't go with their boxes. Boxes full of game stations, valuables, and even extra clothes. Some of the survivors were hoping to use the items, but for most of them, they just didn't want to let go of their stuff. A lot of expensive items represent months or even years of work going into it. Leaving it behind meant that it was gone forever. Other items were a lot harder to let go. I saw a grown couple desperately try to argue with a horned man that they just wanted to bring a small teddy bear with them. The couple had nothing else with them, just the clothes they were wearing and the small teddy bear. I could see tears in their eyes as they tried to keep holding the small teddy bear with them. That broke my heart far more than seeing a teenager told to dump his laptop into the trash. A teddy bear is such a small thing, and yet it clearly meant so much to the couple. They didn't have time to grab a bag, couldn't grab spare clothes, not even a water bottle, but they spared the time to take the risk to grab the teddy bear. It was definitely not due to how much the teddy bear was worth in senti. All the suffering they had faced, and it was made worse by the fact they couldn't so much as bring a single teddy bear into the countryside. That teddy bear was worth the world to them. Their world was falling apart and they couldn't even bring a small memento of whatever that bear represented with them. And they were crying about it. Something about that hurt me deeper than the lines of people carrying nothing and staring blankly ahead. Sure, that was also scary, seeing the lines of refugees below us, but something about a single couple hurt deep in my heart. I couldn't imagine anyone caring about me so much that they would protect a memento of me with their lives. I had Marceline, and I was certain she cared about me, but the amount of love that couple had for their teddy bear, I was almost certain it belonged to their child, and it was a relationship of a very different kind than my own with my parents. We also saw train stations overtaken by the enemy, stations where blood and flesh covered the walls and where the enemy melted into the environment. I saw fleshy plants grow out of the ground. Some of them were like fly traps, however, their teeth were human, and the inside smelled of death in their mouths big enough to hold a person. Whatever was happening with the enemy was not ending anytime soon, and it seemed that they would keep changing and mutating into a brand new biome. We did see the dreadnought in one of the stations. When we saw it, we froze in fear of the terrifying train. The train was a lot like the Overseer in that it was machine and flesh made together, but it wasn't one person, but many made into the dreadnought. I could see many faces stitched into the sides of the train, each eye and face looking around them. The wheels were made from bone and it screeched on the tracks like steel, and the smokestack was something from a nightmare. The smokestack still emitted smoke and smoke that smelled like cooking pork. On the inside of the smokestack, I could see rows upon rows of teeth in the red throat like a garbage disposal that would consume entire bodies, and that was what it was for. We watched in horror as long lines of the enemy walked up to the smokestack, dragging themselves, and sometimes others, to throw them into the smokestack. They fed the dreadnought their own bodies, and they kept feeding the abomination. When there was no more enemy to feed the dreadnought, it moved down the rails, traveling far from us before we continued to move on. We were quiet, but we were all thinking the same thing. What was Adansi doing? The pumpkin house was meant to be scary, but mass suicide to feed an engine of war was pretty hardcore for a Feria festival. I made a promise that I would follow up with her at the center of the pumpkin house. The final train station was indeed quiet and dark. The tracks were overgrown with grass and wildflowers. The train was an old engine and a single passenger car, but the name on the side was the Broad Bottom Bucket. This was the right train. Kel was correct. Awesome, we found the train. Let's find the conductor and we can go to the next area, Kel said before Autumn corrected him. We're finding the engineer, not the conductor. The engineer drives the train. The conductor conducts the train. Pretty big difference between the roles, Autumn said as Summer tapped her shoulder. Hey, that was a bit rude, she warned her sister before Kel spoke up. I'm sorry, engineer. Let's find the engineer, then let's head to the next location, he said with a smile and a small chuckle, laughing at his own mistakes. Mistakes happened, and he accepted it with ease. However, that did not excuse the next thing Autumn said. Next time, don't say something that's wrong even if you don't know it's wrong. Whether or not you know it's correct, that is called lying, and lying is bad. So don't say anything unless you're completely certain it is correct, Autumn said in a very authoritative way. And I saw something I almost never saw Kel do. He frowned. Kel was almost always smiling, whether it was a tough teacher, a bad day, or even being in pain, did not stop him from smiling. I had seen pictures of him after he was run over by the clown, and he was still smiling even with a broken leg. And here he was, now being told he was a liar for making a simple mistake, and it was making him frown. Someone who was as defined by his smile as anything else he did, and he lost his smile because of something one of his friends told to him. Oh, sorry, I'll be more careful next time, he said as Autumn missed the cue with Summer staring daggers through her. Yeah, make sure. We can't get through this if people keep making false statements, she said with no sense of irony. Maybe you should apologize to Kel, I said, and Autumn shook her head. Why would I do that? I didn't do anything wrong. Kel was right where the train was. We're here because of his hard work. If he said something wrong, that's an honest mistake. Making a mistake isn't lying. Don't forget you told him the train wouldn't be here, and you're not calling yourself a liar. I challenged her, and she waved it off. Calling an engineer a conductor isn't a mistake. That's misleading people. How would I have known where the right train is? It isn't a lie for me to make a guess and be wrong, Autumn said, and I shook some of my anger out. She was literally too stupid to argue with. She would be hypocritical of others and excuse her own actions as mistakes out of her control. Still, as much as I wanted to scream, I saw some of Kel's smile return. That was enough for me to stop. Arguing with an idiot was just going to make me the bigger idiot. Well, let's get the engineer, Summer said while distancing herself from her sister, and she knocked on the door only for the engineer to open it. The engineer was a very tall skeleton, at least 2 meters tall. He wore a blue cap and blue uniform. His eyes had two different tea candles, and even though he was always smiling, he seemed to smile wider when he saw Marceline. He waved at her and he looked over us all. He would have a task for each of us, and there was no way to predict what he was going to ask us to do. For you, I asked you. He pointed a bony finger towards Marceline, who stood straight, a bit of her persona, red prints shining through those eyes. She was confident and she was strong. She had a great challenge with the riddles in the previous place, and she was expecting another great challenge from the engineer. What did she get instead? I ask you to have a good trip. It's good to see you again, Mark. The engineer nodded, and the light in the candles dipped to being more blue than red for a moment, like the skeleton would have cried if he was able to. Now for you, he pointed towards Dylan this time. There is a drink card on the train. I want you to make sure that everyone who wants a drink has a drink, he said, and Dylan nodded. He was also expecting a tough challenge, but he was also relieved just to be able to handle the drinks. He pointed towards Summer next. You will be our lookout. Keep an eye out over the tracks and warn us if the enemy gets close. Summer nodded before the engineer turned his attention to Kel. Kel met his eyes, and the skeleton tilted his head like he was confused about what kind of role to give Kel. There is a candle in the main car. If it goes out, you will relight it with the matches next to it. We need the candle to light the way, the engineer said, and the engineer now focused on me. Even though his eyes were only candles, I was certain he was focusing on me. He stared on me for a moment before he finally spoke. Final Florian, last heir of Sage, fallen grace. You have already paid many times over with the Overseer. There is no task I can ask you that is greater than that. Enjoy this ride with your sister, and please know that you have my deepest condolences and my most sincere congratulations, the engineer told me. Somehow, those words made me tear up as I flew off Kel's shoulder, and I bowed my head to the engineer, my hands behind my back. A sign of respect I haven't had for anyone in a very long time. When my head arose again, the skeleton only kept smiling as I finally pointed towards Autumn. As for you, the engine hungers for black stones, and you will keep the engine running, he told Autumn, who was about to speak up before she shut up. She might not respect us, but she respected the rules of the house and the rules given to her by beings that are clearly supernatural compared to her. Still, as we made our way into the train, we each took up our roles. Dylan provided us drinks while Autumn worked in the engine. After a few minutes, the train began to move forward, and as it moved on, the never found tracks, we thought we had found peace. Though, after only 30 minutes, Summer called us over to the back of the train. She saw something that made her nervous, and she felt it was worth warning us all about. We went to the back of the car, and we looked out of the windows. In the back, that allowed us to see both the countryside and the Railyard. Both were in flames. The fire burned so high that it eclipsed the tallest factory in the Railyard. It burned so hot that sweat began to bead on my forehead just from looking at the flames. And the screams. The screams were so loud and plentiful that we could hear them inside our train car. The spread of the enemy had gotten worse. Now the safety of the countryside was gone, and the relative safety of the Railyard was also gone. All those refugees, all those poor survivors who survived the dangers of the city to make it to safety, just as that safety burned. Despite myself, I thought back to that couple with the teddy bear. I hoped that they were all right, and I hoped that they still had the teddy bear. Sure, I helped in a broader sense, that everyone was all right, but it was easier to focus on just the two of them. I didn't wish any harm on anyone, but by remembering those two, it made it feel so much more real to me. They were real people that I saw. They struggled through things I could not possibly imagine. They escaped the danger I was willingly going into, and all they had was a single teddy bear. I hoped that they kept that teddy bear and that they escaped safely. Surely there were other safe places beyond the countryside. I turned away from the burning countryside to our next stop. The radio station was not far ahead. The radio tower was tall, and I convinced myself that we were making a difference. We just had to keep moving forward, even if what was behind us was so horrible. There had to be answers just ahead of us.